The wind was a blade. It came down from the bighorns with nothing to stop it, scouring the high barren plains of Wyoming territory. It flayed the canvas covers of the wagons and drove grit into the eyes of the men huddled outside the settlement's only trading post. It was a mean wind, promising a mean winter. The wagon train, 2 wagons and a half-dozen outriders, was not a merchant train. It carried no barrels of whiskey, no crates of rifles, no bolts of calico. It carried women. They called them bride contracts, a name cooked up back east to make the thing sound like a business arrangement. Here, at the edge of nowhere in 1873, they called it what it was, an auction. Ranchers and trappers came down from their isolated holdings, men who had not seen a woman in 6 months, and paid hard coin for a winter's companion, or, more honestly, for a pair of hands to salt meat, mend clothes, and share a cold bed. The auctioneer was a man named Sledge, who ran the trading post. He stood on a crate, his voice booming over the wind. "Gents, a hard winter approaches. A man needs help to see it through. These ladies have come a long, hard way, seeking protection and a good home." 2 women had already been sold. One, a pale girl from Ohio, no more than 17, had wept openly as a burly, bearded trapper led her away. The other, a harder-looking woman in her 30s, had stared straight ahead, her jaw set, as her new husband paid in silver dollars. "Now," Sledge gestured to the back of the last wagon. "And our final offering, Miss Lorna Harris. Come on down, girl." She did not move. One of the outriders, a rough man with a tobacco-stained beard, climbed into the wagon bed and yanked her out. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the mud. He hauled her up by the arm, shoved her forward, and she stood before the small crowd of men. She was the last, and she looked it. Lorna was maybe 22, but the years had been unkind. She was small-boned, swallowed up by a dress that was torn at the shoulder and stained with things best not named. Her hair, a brown so dark it was nearly black, was matted and clung to her face. There was a yellow-green bruise blooming on her left cheekbone, and her lower lip was split and scabbed. But it was her eyes that held the silence. They were dead. They were the eyes of someone who had been passed from hand to hand, from man to man, so many times that she had stopped seeing them. She stood braced, her shoulders rigid, as if waiting for the next blow. She did not look at the men. She looked past them, at the gray, unforgiving cliffs that ringed the settlement. "Now, this one," Sledge started, his voice losing some of its boom. Lorna's silence was unnerving. "This one is seasoned, good for chores, strong back despite her size." A man in the back grunted. "Seasoned? I heard she's the one from Kansas." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. The outrider who had pulled her from the wagon spat a stream of tobacco juice. "She's the one." "What about Kansas?" another man asked. "Killed her last man," the first man whispered, loud enough for all to hear. "Put a skinning knife right in his gut." "Heard it was self-defense," another voice offered, quieter. "Heard he was a mean one. Broke her arm." "Still," Sledge said, trying to regain control. "She's here. She's bound by contract, all legal. Who'll start the bidding? $20 for a strong worker." The men shuffled. They were desperate for help. But a woman who might knife you in your sleep was a different kind of bargain. They looked at her small, trembling hands, and then at the deadness in her eyes, and they weighed the risk. Lorna did not speak. She did not confirm or deny. She just stood there, a piece of driftwood washed up on a bitter shore. $15, then!" Sledge yelled, his face turning red. "A winter's work for $15. She can cook. She can—" "I'll take her." The voice came from the edge of the crowd, from the deep shadow between the trading post and the blacksmith's shed. It was a low voice, rough as scraped granite. The men turned. The crowd parted. Not out of respect, but out of a quiet, primal fear. He was a tall man, taller than any of them, and built of long, hard lines. He wore a buffalo hide coat that had seen better decades. He moved like a shadow, and as he stepped into the weak afternoon light, the reason for his silence became clear. The left side of his face was a ruin. A mass of puckered, glossy scar tissue pulled his eye down at the corner and erased half his mouth, giving him a permanent, grim sneer. It looked like an old powder burn, or maybe a fire. He rarely came to town. This man, Eli Mercer, he ran a high-country ranch so remote it was considered haunted by the wind. Sledge, for all his bluster, looked pale. "Mercer, we're taking coin today." Eli Mercer did not move. He looked at Lorna. It was not a look of lust or even interest. It was the look a man gives a broken tool he might be able to fix. He just stared, his one good eye unblinking. Lorna, for the first time, focused. She looked at him. She saw the disfigured face, the immense, quiet power in his stillness. She had seen men like this. They were the quiet ones, the ones who hurt you slow. Her breath hitched, just once, but she did not look away. "I said, coin, Mercer," Sledge repeated, trying to sound firm. Eli reached into his coat. The men tensed. He did not pull out a pouch. His hand emerged holding a small, metal object. He drew his arm back and threw it. It landed in the mud at Sledge's feet. Spinning once, it was a sheriff's badge, a tarnished, 5-pointed star, crusted with dark, dried blood in the engraving. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the street. No one knew where the badge came from, or whose blood was on it, but every man there understood its meaning. It was not a payment. It was a settlement. It was a silencing. Sledge stared at the badge as if it were a rattlesnake. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at Mercer's cold, waiting stare. He looked at Lorna, who was already lost. He bent down, his hands shaking, and plucked the badge from the mud. He wiped it on his pants and slipped it into his pocket. "Sold," Sledge whispered, his voice cracking. "To Mr. Mercer," he motioned with a shaky hand. "Go on, girl. You're his—" Lorna was handed over. She did not fight it. She had been handed over before. She knew the steps. She put one foot in front of the other, her eyes going back to the cliffs, back to that dead, empty place. She stopped in front of Eli Mercer, waiting for his hand to grab her arm, to shove her. He did not touch her. He just stood there, a mountain of silence. He looked at her thin, torn dress, and then at the wind that was whipping her hair across her bruised face. The wind carried the first sting of ice. With a sigh, he unbuttoned his heavy wool coat. Lorna flinched. Her hands came up to protect her face. It was a reflex, sharp and fast as a snake strike. This was how it started. The unbuckling of a belt, the unbuttoning of a coat, the prelude to the fist. He stopped. He saw her terror. He did not say, "I won't hurt you." He did not say anything. He just finished unbuttoning the coat, pulled it off his wide shoulders, and dropped it over her. It was immensely heavy. It swallowed her whole. The sleeves hanging a foot past her hands. It smelled of pine smoke, old leather, horse, and the cold, clean scent of the high mountains. It was warm. The warmth was so sudden, so unexpected. It confused her. Mercer turned without a word and walked to his horse, a big, raw-boned gelding that watched the world with its master's mean indifference. Tethered to the hitching post was a smaller, shivering mare. He swung into his own saddle, a movement that was surprisingly fluid for a man his size. He nodded his scarred face toward the mare. "Ride," he said. It was the first word he had spoken to her. She mounted the mare. The saddle was old and cracked, but it was solid. She pulled the massive coat tight around her. He turned his horse's head north, toward the high, wind-torn highlands, and kicked it into a walk. She followed. They rode in silence. Not a word passed between them for hours. The settlement disappeared behind them. The world grew colder, stonier. The wind was a constant howl. a banshee's wail that seemed to come from the earth itself. They climbed, following a narrow, dangerous track that wound up into the cliffs. Lorna was a good rider. Her body was sore, but she knew how to stay in a saddle. She watched his back. He never looked around to see if she was following. He just assumed she would, or, she thought, he did not care if she did or not. As the sun began to die, painting the western sky a bruised purple and blood orange, they crested the last ridge. Below them lay a high valley, a bowl of desolate prairie grass surrounded on three sides by sheer, black cliffs. The wind here was worse, a physical thing that tried to peel her from the saddle. In the center of this bitter cup sat Eli Mercer's ranch. It was not a ranch, it was a grave. The house was a two-room cabin, leaning to one side as if the wind were trying to push it over. The barn was half collapsed, its roof a skeleton of broken timbers, in a makeshift corral. 3 skeletal cows and a single, mournful-looking goat huddled against the fence, their ribs stark beneath their hides. They were starving. This was not a place of prosperity. This was a place a man came to be forgotten by the world. It was clear he lived like a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life. He dismounted, led his horse to the barn, and began to unsaddle it. He did not help her. He expected her to do her own work. She swung down, her legs numb, and fumbled with the cinch on her mare. He finished with his own horse, gave it a scant measure of feed, and then took her mare, finishing the job without a word. He led the animals into the dubious shelter of the ruined barn. He walked to the cabin, pushed the door open, and went inside. She followed, because there was nowhere else on earth to go. The inside was one room. It was dark, and it was freezing. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth black and cold. There was a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and in the corner, a narrow cot with a straw-stuffed mattress and a single, filthy blanket. In the opposite corner was a pile of furs, wolf and coyote, that he clearly used as his own bed. He dropped a small sack of flour and coffee he'd bought in town onto the table. He went to the fireplace, knelt, and with practiced, efficient movements, used his flint and steel to start a fire. The dry kindling caught, and a weak, smoky light filled the room. He gestured to the cot. "Yours." He picked up the pile of furs, walked to the hearth, and dropped them on the floorboards, as far from her cot as the small room would allow. He was giving her the bed. He turned to the fire, taking a pot to fill with water from a bucket by the door. He did not speak much, and when he did, it was clipped and grim. "Water's low," he said, more to himself than to her. "Snow will come tonight." Lorna stood by the door, still wrapped in his coat. She was shaking, but not just from the cold. She did not understand this. He had bought her. He had brought her to this place of death. He was a huge, disfigured man who lived in silence, and he had given her the bed. She expected violence. She expected him to drink, if he had any whiskey. She expected him to finish his chores, bolt the door, and then turn to her. She knew the look. She knew the sound of a man's breathing as he made his decision. That night, she did not undress. She lay on the cot, facing the wall, her body rigid. She pulled the thin blanket over his heavy coat. She listened. She heard the pop and crackle of the fire. She heard him scrape a pot, and the smell of hot, bitter coffee filled the air. He did not offer her any. She heard him sit at the table, the scrape of his chair, the sound of him drinking, the long, deep silences in between. She waited. She listened for the sound of the chair pushing back, for the sound of his boots on the floor, approaching her. Hours passed. The wind shrieked outside. She heard him get up. Her body went rigid, her eyes screwed shut. She heard his boots, but they didn't come toward her. They went to the door. She heard the heavy wooden bolt slide into place. Then the boots returned, not to her bed, but to the fireplace. She heard the rustle of the furs, a heavy sigh, and then the sound of his breathing deepening. settling into the slow, rhythmic pattern of sleep. He did not come to her. Lorna lay awake for a long time. The silence was a new kind of terror. This man was not like the others. And that, she thought, might be the most dangerous thing of all. She finally slept, a shallow, exhausted sleep, and woke in the gray, frozen light of dawn. The fire was embers. He was gone. The pile of furs was empty. She sat up, her heart pounding. Had he left her? She got off the cot, her bare feet hitting the freezing floor. His coat was still around her. On the table was a hunk of dry bread and a small piece of hard cheese. She went to the door, pulled back the heavy bolt, and looked out. He was in the corral, breaking ice in the water trough with a hatchet. The wind was still howling. He did not look up. He was a man of routine. He left again soon after, his rifle on his shoulder. To check trap lines he must have set in the cliffs. He said nothing. He just left. Lorna was alone. She ate the bread, tearing at it like an animal. She drank from the water bucket, and then she explored. She had to know what kind of man this was. The cabin was a testament to a hard, violent life. She ran her fingers over a cluster of old bullet holes in the wall near the door, as if someone had been shot trying to get in or out. There was a dark, reddish-brown stain on the floorboards near the table, a stain that no amount of lye or sand could ever scrub away. In a wooden box under the cot, she found tools, not just carpentry tools. A skinning knife with a long, curved blade, a heavy-toothed saw, meant for bone, a hatchet, its edge sharpened to a razor-fine line, and a long, thin tool with a hook at the end. She did not know what it was for, but it, too, had a dark, crusted stain on it. She put it back, wiping her hands on her dress. Then she saw it. In the back wall, half hidden by shadow, was a small, low door. It was not a closet. It looked like a root cellar entrance. But inside the house, it was built of heavy, thick planks, and it was secured with a heavy, rusted padlock. She went to it. She pulled on the lock. It was solid. Her blood ran cold. The men she had known, they had their secrets, their darkness. But a locked room in a house of bloodstains and bullets? Her mind, poisoned by years of abuse, went to the only place it could. This is where he kept things. This is where he finished things. This quiet, scarred man who gave her his coat and his bed. He was worse than the last man. He was worse than all of them. He was not a man of quick, drunken rages. He was a man of cold, silent, locked away horrors. She would be next. He was just waiting. He was letting her get settled, letting her get soft. The waiting was the worst part. It had always been the worst part. The silence, the anticipation of the inevitable pain. She could not live like this. She could not spend another night, another day, waiting for the quiet to break. She decided, in that cold, dark moment, that she would force his hand. She would make it happen. She would break the tension herself, bring the violence out into the open, where she at least understood the rules. He returned at dusk, empty-handed. A dark mood was on him. The traps were empty. The animals were hiding. He slammed the door. Shaking snow from his hat, he stalked to the fireplace, his face a mask of grim frustration. He began to check his rifle, his movements short and angry. This was the time. Lorna stood up from the table. She walked directly into his space, standing between him and the fire. He was cleaning the rifle's action, and he had a small box of brass cartridges on the floor by his feet. She kicked it. The cartridges scattered across the floorboards, rolling into the shadows. Eli Mercer froze. He looked at the scattered shells. He looked at his ruined face in the firelight. He looked at her. His one good eye was a chip of ice. "Get out of the way, girl," he said. His voice was not a request. It was a low, dangerous rumble. She did not move. She lifted her chin, Her bruised, chapped lips pulled back in a grimace that was almost a smile. "Or what?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracking from disuse.
"You'll hit me? Is that it?"
He stared, his brow furrowing. He was confused.
"Go on,"
she breathed, her terror and desperation twisting into a strange, bitter bravery.
"Get it over with. I know you want to. You're all the same."
She took a step closer and shoved him. It was a small, desperate push against his solid chest. It was like pushing a stone wall. "Do it! Hit me! Stop waiting!" Something in him broke. It was not reason. It was not tenderness. It was a lifetime of raw, jagged, held-in force. A snarl tore from his throat, a sound that was not human. His hand, the one not holding the rifle, shot out. He did not hit her. He did not slap her. He grabbed her. His hand was a steel trap. It closed on her upper arm, his fingers digging in like talons. He was all hard muscle and cold iron. He yanked her off her feet, pulling her so close she could smell the cold snow in his beard and the rage coming off him in waves. His scarred face was inches from hers. His good eye was blazing, but it was not with lust. It was with a terrible, agonized pain. It was the look of a cornered animal. She cried out, a small, sharp sound. His fingers were digging into the old bruises, into the tender flesh. The force of it, the sudden, violent control, was exactly what she had expected. She looked at his massive, calloused hand wrapped around her arm. She looked back at his tortured face. She did not fight. She did not plead. She just stated the only truth she had left in the world.
"You're hurting me,"
she said, her voice clenched. The words struck him like a bullet. The fire in his eye vanished, replaced by a sudden, stark horror. He looked down at his own hand, this massive thing that could break stone, wrapped around her thin arm. He saw his knuckles, white from the pressure. He saw her face, not defiant anymore, just accepting the pain. He let go. He dropped her arm as if it were burning him. He stumbled back, crashing into the table. He looked at his own hand, which was now trembling. He clenched it into a fist, then opened it, staring at the palm. He looked ashamed. He looked terrified of himself. He would not look at her. He looked at the floor, at the scattered shells, at the fire. His voice, when it came, was a whisper, a scrape of dry leaves, the sound of something broken. "It's the only force I know." The snow came that night, just as he had predicted. It did not drift down in gentle flakes. It arrived as a solid, white wall, a horizontal blizzard driven by a wind that screamed like a dying animal. For 3 days, the world vanished. There was no sky, no cliffs, no barn. There was only the cabin and the deafening, suffocating roar of the storm. They were trapped. The settlement was a lifetime away. No supplies could come in. Nothing could go out. They were 2 people buried alive at the top of the world. The silence that Eli had broken with his confession was replaced by the noise of the wind, and in its shadow, a new silence grew between them. It was awkward and heavy. He had shown her the animal inside him, and then shown her his shame. She had shown him her terror, and then her defiance. Now, neither knew where to stand. Laughter the first day. The wind died down enough for Lorna to see the snow. It was piled in great sculpted drifts against the windows, blotting out what little light there was. A cold dread settled in her stomach, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was alone with this man, and the world was gone. She had to move. To stay still was to let the fear win. She rose from the cot, still wrapped in his coat, and looked around the cabin. It was a pigsty, the floor thick with mud, old food, and dust. She found a bucket, a rag, and a block of lye soap. She went to the water barrel. It was half empty. She used the water sparingly, scrubbing the floor on her hands and knees. Eli watched her. He sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle again, his hands methodical, He watched her back, the way her small frame moved, the set of her shoulders. He watched her as she found a broken needle and some thread and began to mend the tears in her own ruined dress. He watched her, and he said nothing. On the third day, the snow stopped. The silence that fell was absolute, heavy as a shroud. The world outside was a blinding, pristine white. Lorna pulled on the boots Eli had left by the door. They were too big, but they were better than nothing and waded through the chest-deep snow to the barn. The 3 skeletal cows were still standing. Barely. The goat, however, bleated weakly when it saw her. It was a nanny, its udder small and tight. She found a tin pail. Her hands were raw and frozen, but she worked at the goat until she had a meager cupful of thin, bluish milk. She brought it inside. Eli was by the fire, staring into it. She put the pail on the table. He looked at the milk. Then he looked at her.
I will work,
she said. Her voice was a croak.
I will earn my keep.
He just nodded, a short, grim jerk of his head, and turned back to the fire. The days fell into a hard, brutal routine. The storm had sealed the valley, but it had not left. It crouched on the ridges, sending down waves of impossible cold. Every morning, Lorna milked the goat, her fingers sticking to the frozen metal pail. She chopped kindling from the dwindling wood pile, the axe heavy and awkward in her hands. She learned to bank the fire, to make their meager flour last by mixing it with snow to make a thin, tasteless gruel. She found a hole in his wool shirt, a tear near the collar. She took it while he was out checking his empty traps, and she sewed it. Her stitches were small and tight. When he returned, he saw the shirt folded on the table. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the neat line of thread, and his scarred mouth tightened. He put the shirt on, and the mended part was hidden in the shadow of his beard. Eli watched her. He watched her move through his space, cleaning the filth he had lived in for years. He watched her small, capable hands as she restacked the wood, as she scraped the last bits of meat from a rabbit he managed to trap. Sometimes, he watched her with a raw, buried longing. She was the only living, breathing woman he had seen in 2 years. He watched the curve of her neck when she bent over the fire, and he would feel a tightening in his gut that made him angry. He would get up and leave, slamming the door, and go stand in the snow until the feeling froze inside him. Other times, he watched her with a crushing guilt. He saw the bruises on her face, the old, silvery scars on her hands. He saw the way she flinched if he moved too quickly for the coffee pot. He saw the deadness in her eyes, and he remembered the badge, crusted with blood, that he had thrown at Sledge's feet. He had bought her. He was no better than any of them. He had just paid with a different coin. One morning, the cold was so sharp it felt like glass in the lungs. Lorna woke and Eli was already gone. The cabin was freezing. She pulled his coat tighter. She never took it off, and went to the barn, carrying the pail for the goat. She pushed open the heavy barn door and stopped. Eli was kneeling in the frozen hay, the weakest of the 3 cows. A young calf born too late in the season was lying on its side. It was frozen solid, its eyes open and opaque. Eli was not moving. His back was to her. He was a great, dark shape in the gloom of the barn. She saw his shoulders shaking. It was a small movement, a silent, rhythmic tremor. He was weeping. He was not making a sound. The tears just ran, catching in his beard and freezing on his cheeks. He was weeping for this small, dead animal. Weeping for the ranch that was dying around him, for the life he could not hold together, for a failure so complete it had hollowed him out. Lorna stood in the doorway. She did not know what to do. The men she had known used tears as a weapon, a prelude to a drunken rage. But this was grief. This was silence and salt water. She did not speak. She did not touch him. She slowly unwrapped the thin wool shawl she wore under his coat. It was the only thing she owned that was truly hers. It was old and frayed, but it was warm. She stepped forward, her boots crunching in the snow. He heard her and his whole body went rigid. He wiped his face, his movements harsh and angry, ashamed to be seen. He started to rise, to turn on her. Before he could, she simply held out the shawl. He froze, his hand halfway to his face. He stared at the piece of faded wool. He looked at her. Her face was blank, her eyes holding no pity, no judgment. It was just an offering. His hand, the one that had grabbed her arm, reached out. His fingers, thick and scarred, brushed hers as he took the cloth. It was the first time they had touched skin to skin. He held the shawl, this small, soft thing, in his massive, rough hand. He did not say thank you. He just stuffed it into his pocket, his face a mask of stone, and stalked past her, out of the barn and into the blinding white. The days got harder. The trap lines were empty. The flour sack was almost empty. They were down to boiling old bones for a thin, greasy broth. Hunger became a permanent resident in the cabin, a cold, hollow ache in the belly. One night, the wind picked up again, and with it came a new sound, a chorus of howls, thin and high and hungry, a wolf pack, driven down from the high country by the storm. Eli bolted the door and put another log on the fire. He checked his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered, and went out. Laxness, born of hunger and cold, had made him careless. He had left the old mare, the one Lorna had ridden, in the broken-down corral instead of the barn. The wolves were smarter. Lorna heard it. A single piercing scream from the horse, a sound of pure terror that was cut short by a wet, savage tearing. She heard the snarling, the cracking of bone. Eli ran back, his rifle barking twice into the darkness. The howling retreated, but the damage was done. He came back inside. He did not say anything. He just sat at the table, his face carved from ice, and stared at his hands. He had failed again. He had lost another mouth to feed. Yes, but he had also lost a good horse. He had lost capital. Lorna watched him. She knew what this meant. She knew debt. She had been paying debts all her life. The goat gave almost no milk. The food was gone. The horse was gone. And she was just another mouth, another burden. She stood up. She felt a strange, cold calm. This was a bargain she understood. This was a world she knew. She walked to him. He did not look up. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was flat. He looked up, his one good eye cloudy with frustration. She began to unbutton the top of her dress, the dress she had mended. Her fingers were slow, clumsy from the cold. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low. "The horse is gone," she said, as if explaining simple arithmetic. "You paid for me. You are feeding me. I will repay what I owe." She pulled the dress off her shoulders, letting it fall to her waist, revealing the thin, patched chemise beneath. Her shoulders were small and sharp, her skin pale. She was shivering, but her eyes were steady. She was offering herself to him. Not in passion, but in payment. Eli looked at her. He saw her exposed skin, her ribs, the way she braced herself for his touch. A violent, cold anger rose in him. It was so sudden, so hot, it choked him. He slammed his fist on the table. The tin cup jumped and fell to the floor. "No!" he roared. The word was so loud it echoed in the tiny cabin. Lorna flinched, her whole body recoiling, her hands coming up to cover herself. "Get dressed," he snarled, his voice trembling with a rage she could not understand. He was not angry at her. He was angry at the world that had taught her this was her only value. He was angry that she looked at him and saw just another buyer. "I am not them," he bit out. He stood up, kicking his chair back, and turned his back to her, facing the fire. His whole body was rigid. "Cover yourself. I will not. I will not." He could not finish. He could not say the words. She, trembling, pulled the dress back up, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. He was angry. He had refused her. She did not understand. She had offered the only coin she possessed, and he had thrown it back in her face. This was a new kind of rejection, and it scared her more than his force had. She retreated to her cot and lay down, facing the wall, her body coiled tight as a spring. That night, the past came for her. She was back in Kansas. She was in the dark, dirty shed behind the saloon, and the man, her husband Silas, was coming toward her. He was drunk, his face slack, his eyes mean. He was unbuckling his belt. She was screaming. She was telling him no. She was scrabbling in the dark for the skinning knife she kept hidden. "No! Get off me!" Her scream was real. It ripped through the silence of the cabin. Eli, sleeping by the fire, was awake instantly. The soldier in him, the vigilante in him, reacted without thought. Threat, danger. He was on his feet and across the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her shoulder, his hand clamping down hard. "Lorna, wake up! You're dreaming!" She woke in pure animal terror. A large, dark shape was looming over her. A hand was on her, holding her down. A man's voice was in her ear. She screamed again and threw herself back, trying to claw his face, to get away.
Don't, please don't touch me.
She scrambled off the cot, falling to the floor, and Crab walked backward until she hit the cold stone of the fireplace. She huddled there, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes wide and wild, panting. Eli stood by the cot, his hand still outstretched. He was breathing hard. He looked at her, this small, terrified creature, cowering from him as if he were a wolf himself. She had flinched. Not just a startle, she had looked at him, and she had seen a monster. He stepped back. He stepped back again, as if she had struck him. He looked visibly shaken. The force he knew, the only thing he knew, had just proven to be the most destructive thing in the world. He sank onto his own pile of furs by the fire, his head in his hands. I am sorry, he whispered.
I was just you were screaming.
Lorna watched him. Her breathing slowed. He was not coming for her. He was sitting. He looked as broken as she felt. They sat in the near dark. The fire was down to embers. The only sound was the wind, which had returned. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice rough. He did not look at her. She did not answer for a long time.
"The last one,"
she finally whispered. "In Kansas. The one they said I killed." Eli nodded slowly. He looked at his own hands. "I know about killing." He reached for a small log and placed it on the embers, his back to her. The wood sparked, and a small, weak flame licked up, painting his scarred face in lines of red and black. "I fought in the war," he said, his voice flat, as if reciting a list. "Missouri. I was not a good soldier. I was good at stopping things. After, I rode with a vigilante group. My family was killed. Raiders. They came through and..." He stopped. "We thought we were getting justice. We were just getting even. It was just more blood. There is no end to the blood." He paused, his gaze lost in the small fire. "I was captured once, by a Union officer. He did not like my methods." Slowly, his body stiff, he turned his back to her. He pulled his shirt up, exposing his back. Lorna's breath caught. In the faint firelight, his back was a landscape of old, healed-over wounds, but they were not bullet holes. They were parallel, puckered ridges, pale and glossy, the unmistakable mark of a whip. "He said I was an animal," Eli whispered, his voice thick. "He said I needed to be taught a lesson. He was right. I was." He let the shirt fall. Lorna stared at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders. She stared at the bullet holes in the wall, at the stained tools, at the locked door. She understood. This was not a man who was cruel for pleasure. This was a man who had been forged in cruelty, who had been hammered into this shape by war and pain and loss. He had shown her his scars. The silence was hers to fill. "My uncle," she said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it.
My folks died of fever. He sold me. I was 17, to a mining camp in Colorado.
Eli did not move. He just listened. There were 4. The first one was old. He died. The second one lost me in a card game. The third one, he was not good. She stopped, her hands twisting in the fabric of his coat.
The last one was Silas, the one in Kansas.
He liked to show me who was boss. He used his belt. He said I was his property. She took a shaky breath. One night, I tried to run. He caught me, on the prairie. He dragged me back. He said he was going to brand me, so everyone knew who I belonged to. She was shaking now, not from the cold, but from the memory.
He had the fire hot. He had the brand. He was drunk.
Her hand crept to her side, to the place where a knife might be. I found the skinning knife. He turned, and I did it. I stabbed him. I did not mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. She was weeping now, the same silent, hot tears he had shed in the barn. I ran. They found me near the Nebraska border. The contracts, they said I was still bound. They sent me here. He turned, very slowly. He looked at her, huddled by the stones. He looked at her, and his face was a mirror of her own pain. There it was, the moment. They both saw it. They saw each other. They were not a man and a woman. They were 2 survivors, 2 people who had been pushed so far that they had to meet force with force. They both understood, in that cold, dark cabin, a truth the rest of the world did not, that survival by force leaves more than bruises. It hollows you out. It takes your soul and leaves a scarred, hard thing in its place. The fire was dying. The cold, which had been at the edges, now flooded the room. It was a dangerous, killing cold. Lorna's tears froze on her cheeks. She was shivering violently. She looked at the dying embers, and then at her narrow cot, with its one thin blanket. Then she looked at his pile of furs, near the weak warmth. Survival. She stood up, her body aching. She walked to the pile of furs. This was not a transaction. This was not repayment. This was necessity. To sleep apart was to freeze. She stood over him, a small, dark shadow. We will be warmer, she whispered. He just nodded. She lay down on the furs, her back to him, curling into a tight ball. He lay down behind her, his body a solid, unmoving wall. They did not touch. They just lay there, sharing the small space, their breathing the only sound. But the cold was too deep. Even with the furs, it crept in. Lorna was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. This was not enough. She thought of the men. She thought of what they took. This man, he was different, but the cold was the same. She believed she still owed him. For the food, for the coat, for not being like them. She owed him her body, if only for its warmth. Slowly, her hands trembling, she sat up. She reached for the buttons of her dress. She would do this. It was the only way. She had to. She fumbled with the first button, and his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. It was not a hard grip. It was just a stop. "Don't," he said, his voice a low growl.
But we are freezing,
she whispered, her voice breaking.
I owe.
You owe nothing. He let go of her wrist. He reached for the heavy, greasy blanket on her cot. He stood up, towering over her, and he covered her. He draped the blanket over her, tucking it around her shoulders. Then he took his own buffalo hide coat, the one he had given her at the auction, and laid it on top of the blanket. He was leaving himself with nothing. He lay back down on the furs, on the outside of the blankets, his body a shield against the drafts from the door. He would take the brunt of the cold. She lay there, buried under the layers, a small, fragile warmth beginning to seep into her. She was stunned. "I don't understand," she whispered into the darkness. She heard him sigh, a long, ragged sound. "I don't want to take anything," he said, his voice so quiet she barely heard it. "Not like that. Not ever. I want you to give it. When you are ready." She went very still. Give. Ready. These were words from a language she did not speak. They were concepts as foreign as sunshine, as impossible as a locked door opening on its own. She lay there, her eyes wide open in the dark, staring at the rough logs of the cabin wall, and for a long time, she did not move. For 2 weeks, the valley was a frozen grave. Then, one morning, a new sound woke Lorna. Dripping, she lay on the cot, listening. The wind had stopped. In its place was the steady, gentle thump, thump, thump of heavy, wet snow sliding from the cabin roof. A trickle of water ran down the inside of the frosty window pane. The great storm had broken. The iron grip of the cold had softened, just slightly, to a wet, muddy slush. When Eli rose from his furs, he did not just tend the fire. He went to the door and stood in it, breathing the new, damp air. The world was no longer a solid, screaming white. It was a watery gray. The cliffs were visible again, their black rocks streaked with melting snow, weeping lines down their faces. "The game will be moving," he said, more to himself than to her. He spent the morning oiling his rifle, his movements precise. He took the last of the jerked meat, a piece as hard and dry as wood, and shoved it in his pocket. He pulled on his heavy coat, the one he had slept beside rather than under. He looked at her. Their night of shared confessions, of shared warmth, lay between them like a fragile, new-formed sheet of ice. He had not touched her since, not even by accident. He had been careful to keep his distance, as if remembering her flinch, her terror. "I am going out," he said, "to hunt. The wood is low. Do not let the fire die." Lorna nodded. Pulling her own shawl, the one he had kept in his pocket for a day before returning to her, tighter. He paused at the door. "Bolt it behind me."
"I will," she said.
He left. She watched from the window as he waded through the deep, wet snow, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm, his tall, scarred figure the only moving thing in the vast, white bowl of the valley. Then he disappeared into the pines near the base of the cliffs. Lorna bolted the door. She sat at the table. The cabin was silent. It was the first time she had been truly alone since the storm. The silence was immense. It was no longer filled with the howling of the wind, or the sound of his breathing across the room. It was just empty. She looked at his pile of furs, still holding the impression of his body. She looked at the cot where she slept. She thought of his words. "I want you to give it, when you are ready." She had been property for so long. She had been a debt, a bargain, a thing to be paid for, a mouth to feed. He had, with those few words, made her a person with a choice, and it terrified her. Cruelty. She understood. Violence was a language she spoke fluently. She knew how to brace for a blow, how to make her body small, how to survive the pain by sending her mind somewhere far away. She knew the rules of that world. This new world, this world of kindness, of shared grief, of a man who slept on the floor to keep her warm, this world had no rules she recognized. His kindness felt like a trap. It was a hook, baited with something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. She found herself waiting for his return, listening for his footsteps. She found herself watching his hands, not in fear, but in curiosity. She had felt a strange, hollow ache when he had not touched her again. She recognized the feeling. It was the same feeling she'd had as a child, right before her uncle had taken her away. It was the feeling of wanting something, and the world had taught her that wanting anything was the surest way to have it ripped from you. He would change. He had to. He was a man. He was scarred, full of force and violence. He had admitted it. "It's the only force I know." He had said it himself. He was just waiting. He was being kind to gentle her, to make her soft, to make the eventual taking that much easier. She could not bear it. She could not bear the waiting. She could not sit here, day after day, waiting for the other boot to drop, waiting for the kindness to curdle into the same mean hunger all the others had shown. To be his property was a hell she knew. To be his, in the way his eyes sometimes looked at her, was a new, fragile, terrifying thing she could not risk. The pain of that, when it broke, would be worse than any fist. She would not wait for him to become cruel. She would leave. Her hands shook. She looked around the cabin. There was nothing to take. The coat on her back was his. The boots on her feet were his. The food in her belly was his. She found a piece of charcoal from the hearth, on a sliver of bark. She wrote. Her letters were clumsy, childish. "Thank you." She stared at the words. They were true. She was thankful. Thankful for the coat, for the food, for not taking. She added 2 more words, a declaration to him and to herself. "But I don't belong to anyone." She left the bark on the table. She unbolted the door and stepped out into the cold, wet world. She did not look back. She waded through the slush, heading not for the pass. She knew she would never make it, but for the other side of the valley, where the cliffs were broken. She just needed to be away. She just needed to be alone. Eli returned at sunset. A small buck draped over his shoulders. The kill had been hard won. A long stalk through waist-deep drifts. He was exhausted, but for the first time in months, there was meat. He pushed open the cabin door. "I got one," he said to the empty room. The fire was low, guttering embers. The cabin was cold. "Lorna?" He dropped the buck by the door. His eyes swept the room. The cot was empty. The chair was empty. He saw the tracks in the mud near the hearth. A cold, sharp feeling, colder than any blizzard, went through him, not anger, fear, a deep, hollow dread. He strode to the table. He saw the piece of bark. He picked it up, his large, scarred fingers dwarfing it. "Thank you, but I don't belong to anyone." He read the words 3 times. He understood the "thank you." It meant she did not fear him. He understood, "I don't belong to anyone." It meant she feared everything else. She feared the contract. She feared the world. She feared him being just another master. He let out a breath, a ragged, harsh sound. He had spent his whole life tracking things, men who had done wrong, animals for food. It was what he knew. Force and pursuit. He grabbed his rifle, which he had not even set down. He went back outside. It was almost dark, but the wet snow held the tracks perfectly. Small boot prints, his own, swallowed her feet. They were clumsy, wandering. She was not a woodswoman. She was just running. He tracked her through the twilight. The tracks led up the far side of the valley, toward a cluster of rocks he knew well. He moved quickly, his long legs eating up the ground, his fear a cold stone in his gut. He found her in a place he had not been in years, a burned-out cabin, the one his wife's family had built. Before the raiders came, it was just a chimney stack and 3 low, charred walls, open to the sky. She was huddled in a corner, out of the wind, her knees drawn to her chest. She was shivering violently, her skin blue in the dusk. She had no fire, she had no blankets. She had come here to die, or to freeze, or just to be free, even if it was only for a few hours. She heard him. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were wide with terror. She looked like a cornered rabbit. "Lorna," he said. His voice was rough from the cold. "Go away," she cried, her voice thin and cracking. "Go away. I am not your property." "I know that," he said, his voice quiet. He did not move closer. He stayed 20 feet away, his rifle pointed at the ground. You were just waiting," she wept, the tears freezing on her face. "You were being kind. I know that trick. You gentle the horse before you break it. You fatten the calf before the before." I am not them," he said, the same words he had snarled at her before. But now they were not angry. They were a plea. "You will be," she screamed. the sound echoing off the burned stones.
I cannot bear it. Eli, I cannot wait for it. I cannot watch you every day and wonder when you will change, when you will get drunk, or when the hunt goes bad, or when you just decide, I would rather be here.
He stood there for a long time, the dead buck a heavy weight on his shoulders. He finally understood. It was not his force that had driven her away. It was his tenderness. He had broken her open with it, exposed a raw nerve, and she could not stand the air. He walked forward, slowly. She flinched and pressed herself harder against the chimney. No, please. He did not stop. He reached her. He did not grab her arm. He did not yell. He slung the buck off his shoulders, letting it thud onto the snow. He leaned his rifle against the wall, and then he shrugged out of his heavy coat, the smell of pine and cold sweat rising from it. He wrapped it around her, pulling her to her feet.
She was so light. She was all bone and trembling.
You are hurting me, she whispered, a broken echo of that first night.
I know,
he said, his voice thick.
I am sorry for it.
He bent down and slid one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and he lifted her. She made a small, terrified sound, like a kitten, and her hands flew up, not to strike him, but to grab onto his shirt. She buried her frozen face against his chest. He did not scold her. He did not lecture her. He just carried her. He carried her all the way back to the cabin, his own body burning with the effort, the cold wind whipping at his thin wool shirt. He kicked the door open. The fire was almost dead. He set her down on the furs by the hearth, and he did not stop moving. He worked with a fierce, controlled energy. He put new logs on the embers, using his hatchet to shave dry splinters, blowing on them until they caught. He piled wood next to the fireplace. He went back out, dragged the buck inside, and with his skinning knife, he cut a piece of venison, his hands sure and quick. He cooked it in the skillet, the sound of the sizzling meat and the smell of it filling the small, warm room. He put the meat on a tin plate and handed it to her. She was huddled in his coat, her shivering easing, her eyes huge, watching him. She took the plate. She ate like a wolf, tearing at the hot meat, not caring that it burned her fingers. He watched her, and he cooked another piece for himself, and they ate in silence. When she was done, he just took the plate from her. He built the fire higher. He sat on his side of the hearth, and he just was. Days passed. The thaw held. The world outside was a swamp of mud and slush, but the cabin was warm. It was full of the smell of roasting meat. The gaunt, hollow look began to leave their faces. The ice between them had been broken, shattered by her flight and his retrieval. What grew in its place was something new, something quiet and strange. He talked, not much, but more. He told her how his father had brought him to this valley. He told her about his horse, the one he'd had before the war. She listened, and she began to mend his things, not as a chore, but as an act. She restitched the sole of his boot. She cleaned the cabin until it shone, routing out the dirt of his grief. One afternoon, he was trying to fix a broken hinge on the door, and he was failing. He hit his thumb with the hammer, cursed, and the entire hinge fell off, sending the door sagging. Lorna was stirring a pot of thin soup. She watched him stare at the broken door, his scarred face a picture of pure, silent frustration. A small sound escaped her, a puff of air. It was almost a cough. Eli turned. His good eye narrowed. She pressed her lips together, but her shoulders were shaking. He looked so defeated. By a door, this man who carried deer on his back and stared down blizzards. A bubble of laughter, rusty and small, broke from her throat. Eli stared. He had never heard her laugh. He had never heard anyone laugh in this house. The sound was alien, like a bird singing in a tomb. He looked at the stupid, broken door. He looked at his smarting thumb. He looked at her, and the scarred side of his mouth twitched. He could not smile. Not really, but he let out a short, rough huff of air. And she laughed again, a real laugh this time, and the sound of it was so strange and beautiful in the silent house that it shocked them both. They fell silent, looking at each other, the echo of it hanging in the smoky air. That night, the laughter was gone, and the fear returned. A storm blew in, not snow, but a cold, driving rain that turned to ice. The wind howled. It was the sound of the wolves. It was the sound of the past. Lorna lay on her cot, her back to the room, her body rigid. She could not sleep. Every creak of the logs was a footstep. Every howl was a man's voice. She heard Eli's breathing, deep and steady, from his furs by the fire. He was asleep. He was safe. She was not. She was alone, in the dark. "Eli," she whispered. His breathing stopped. He was awake, instantly. "What?"
I cannot,"
she started, her voice trembling.
"The dream, it is coming back."
She heard him sit up, the rustle of the furs.
It is too quiet,"
she whispered, her voice breaking.
"It is too dark. I do not want to be alone."
The silence stretched. She had asked. She had given him her fear. She heard him stand. He did not come to her cot. He stood by the fire. "Come here," he said, his voice low.
"By the fire. It is warmer."
She rose, her thin blanket clutched around her. She went to the hearth, to his pile of furs, and she stood before him, shaking. "I am not," she tried to say. "I am not offering payment." "I know," he said. He sat down on the furs and moved to one side, making a space for her. She lay down, her back to him, her body as stiff as a board. He lay down behind her, close but not touching. Neither slept. They lay there for an hour, 2, listening to the ice storm rage outside. The space between them was electric. It was full of their confessions, their fears, their shared warmth. She was so cold. He was so warm. Slowly, hesitantly, she moved, shifting her weight, her back brushing his chest. He did not recoil. He did not move forward. He just was. Under the blankets, her hand was clenched by her chest. She uncurled her fingers. She slid her hand back, slowly, until her knuckles brushed the rough wool of his shirt. He did not move. She risked it. She slid her hand farther, until it touched his. His hand was huge, calloused, and warm. His fingers, slowly, one by one, closed around hers. They did not twine. He just held her hand, like an anchor, like a promise. She let out a breath she had been holding for 5 years. And for the first time, she slept without dreaming. They woke in the gray dawn, their hands still loosely clasped. The fire was embers. The storm had passed. It was awkward. She pulled her hand away, her face flushing. He sat up, running his hand over his scarred face, clearing his throat. They did not speak. He rebuilt the fire. She started to make coffee. She reached for the pot at the same time he reached for his cup. Their hands brushed. This time, neither pulled away. He looked at her. His one good eye was clear. He saw her, truly saw her. The bruises were faded. The split lip was healed. Her hair, which she had washed, was soft. She was beautiful. She looked at him. She saw the scarred face, the ruined mouth, the deep pain in his eye, and she was not afraid. He leaned in, his movements slow, clumsy. He had forgotten how to do this. He was giving her every chance to pull away. She did not pull away. She rose on her toes, just a little, and she met him. It was not a good kiss. It was chapped lips and beard scratch and the bitter taste of coffee. It was awkward and strange and terrified. It was two people who had forgotten how to be gentle, trying to remember. He pulled back, his face full of a question he did not know how to ask. She answered it. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the heavy beat of his heart, and she kissed him again. This time it was not a question, it was an answer. He was so large. He was all force and old scars, but his hands, when he finally raised them to touch her, were shaking. He touched her hair, his calloused fingers gentle, as if she were a piece of thin glass. They made love. It was not perfect. It was not beautiful. It was not like the stories in the dime novels. It was tender. It was hesitant. It was two people, terrified of ruining the one good thing they had found. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his body a question, his eyes fixed on hers, checking, always checking. Am I hurting you? And she was not property. She was not a debt. She was not a payment. She was giving. She met his force, not with resistance, but with her own fragile strength. She held on to his shoulders, and for the first time in her life, she was not surviving. She was not enduring. She was there. After they lay tangled in the furs, the morning light filling the cabin, the fire was warm. The world was quiet. Eli held her, his arm heavy and solid across her waist, as if he were afraid she might dissolve. And Lorna began to weep. He tensed. He pulled back, his face instantly panicked.
I hurt you, Lorna. No,
she sobbed, and she turned in his arms, pressing her face against his chest. It was not the silent, pained weeping of the barn. It was a raw, racking, open grief.
No, you did not. You did not hurt me.
Then what? He asked, his voice rough with confusion. She clung to him, her small hands gripping his shirt. She was weeping from fear. She had just let herself be safe. She had just let herself be loved, if that was what this was. She had just built a house in a place she never thought she would be, and the terror of losing it was a physical pain.
What happens when someone finds me again?
She whispered, her voice choked. What happens when they come for me? Eli was silent for a long time. He held her, his hand smoothing her hair. He was not a man of pretty words or empty promises. He held her until her sobs quieted. He looked over her head, at the cabin door, at the bullet holes in the wall. His face settled back into its hard, grim lines. But it was different now. The force was still there, but it was not for himself.
It was for her.
He pressed his lips to the top of her head. They won't, he said. The false spring held for 3 days. The valley floor turned to a soupy, boot-sucking mud, and the air held a damp, rotten smell. But it was not winter, and that was enough. Eli and Lorna had settled into a new rhythm, one defined by the quiet space of their shared blanket and the clumsy, hesitant touches that were still new to them. The cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a refuge. The peace was broken by the sound of a horse. It was not Eli's gelding, it was a stranger. Lorna, who was scrubbing a pot by the fire, dropped it with a clang, the sound of her old terror, sharp and metallic. Eli was at the door in an instant, his rifle in his hand. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes. A single rider was making his way up the muddy track, his horse blowing hard. It was Jedediah Stone, the blacksmith from the settlement. Jed was a man of few words, who mostly kept to his forge and his bottle. But he was not a cruel man. He had no reason to ride this high, not unless the news was bad. Eli waited, his body a silent, hard line, the rifle held loose at his side. Jed reined in, his horse's flanks heaving. He did not dismount. He looked at Eli's scarred face, then glanced past him, at the cabin door, where Lorna was a pale shadow in the darkness. Mercer, Jed grunted, his voice hoarse. Jed, Eli replied.
Long ride for a visit.
Not a visit. Jed spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the mud. Rode up to tell you. Figured. Well, I figured you ought to know. Know what? Jed's eyes flicked back to the cabin. Man rode into the settlement yesterday. A professional. Hard eyes, clean gun, rides a fine black horse. Lorna's hand came to her throat. He was asking questions at Sledge's. Jed continued. About the last wagon train. About the women, specifically. About the one from Kansas. Eli did not move. His face was stone. He's a hunter. Mercer carries a stack of papers with him. I saw one. Sledge was showing him the ledger. Jed leaned forward, lowering his voice. It was a wanted poster. Had a name on it. Lorna Harris. And it had her face. Drawn pretty good, too. Lorna made a small, strangled sound. She backed away from the door, stumbling into the table. He's paying good money for information, Jed said. And Sledge, he's a $50 man. He'll sell his own mother for half that. He told the hunter who took her. Told him about you, about this valley. I see, Eli said. His voice was flat, dead. He left the settlement this morning, headed north, toward the pass. He's coming. Mercer, I took the high track to get here first. You got maybe an hour, 2, if his horse does not like the mud. Eli just nodded. I thank you for the ride. Jed. Is it her? Jed asked, his gaze fixed on the shadow in the cabin. Eli's hand tightened on his rifle. She's my wife. Jedediah Stone looked at the hard, scarred man, at the rifle, at the isolated, dying ranch. He sighed. Wife, contract, don't matter to him. He's here for the bounty. Good luck to you. Mercer, you're gonna need it. He wheeled his horse around and kicked it into a sliding, muddy trot, back down the trail. Eli stood for a full minute, watching him go. Then he turned and went back into the cabin, bolting the door behind him. Lorna was in the corner, by the cot. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. He's coming, she whispered. The man from Kansas, he sent someone. No, she said, her voice rising to a thin wail. No, 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 I told you they would find me. She scrambled, her eyes wide and animal wild. She grabbed the coat, his coat, from the peg. I have to go, I have to run. If he finds me here, he will kill you. Eli, he will kill you for hiding me. He will try, Eli said. His voice was quiet. He was not panicked. He was eerily calm. He went to the fireplace and took down his second rifle, the heavy buffalo gun. He laid it on the table. He took the box of cartridges, the same ones she had kicked, and began, one by one, to check them and lay them in a neat row. Did you hear me? She cried. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. I have to go. You cannot stop him. No, Eli said, his voice flat. He did not look at her. He just continued to load the rifle. I am not letting you go. You cannot keep me, she screamed, her terror turning to rage. I am not your property. You said I could choose. I am choosing to leave. He stopped. He put the rifle down, and he turned to her. He put his large, calloused hands on her shoulders. His grip was firm, not violent, but absolute. Lorna, he said, his one good eye boring into hers. He is not here to talk. He is not here to bargain. He is a hunter. He gets paid if you are dead, or if you are in chains. You run, he will track you. He will catch you in the snow. And he will do God knows what to you before he brings you back. Is that what you want? I cannot, she sobbed. You are right, Eli said, his voice dropping, his grip softening. You are not my property, but I am not letting you run to your death. What then? She wept, her fists clenched against his chest. We will just wait for him to come and kill us both? I am not going to let him kill us, Eli said. He looked past her, toward the back of the cabin, toward the locked door. He is coming for one person, Eli said, his voice hard. He is not expecting two. He walked to the locked door. Lorna watched, her breath held, the place of her nightmares. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a large, iron key. Eli, what is in there? She whispered. He put the key in the rusted lock. It turned with a loud, grating groan. He pulled the heavy padlock off and opened the small, thick planked door. A rush of cold, earthy air came out. It was a root cellar. It was dug deep into the earth, the walls lined with stone, the shelves neat and orderly, but they were not full of food. They were full of ghosts. On one shelf, there were jars of preserves, the fruit inside black and rotten with age. On another, a stack of plates, a woman's sewing box, and a small, leather-bound book. On the floor was a wooden chest. "This was my wife's," Eli said, his voice rough. "Her family's. When the raiders came, she hid in here. They found her. They set the house on fire. Over her—" Lorna put her hand over her mouth. "I cleaned it out," he said, his voice dead. "I buried her. I locked it. I never came back down." He took a deep breath. "It is the safest place. The walls are stone. The door is thick. You will go in here." "No," Lorna said, her voice firm. "No. Eli, I will not hide in a grave. I will not let you fight him alone. I can shoot." "You are not a good shot," he said, his voice flat. "And you are not a killer. Lorna, not really. You are a survivor. I need you to survive this." He began to move. He took her small, thin blanket from the cot. He took a jug of water. He took the last of the cooked venison. "Get in," he said. "Eli, please." "Get in." It was the old force, the granite in his voice. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Lorna," he said, his voice softening again, becoming that terrible, tender thing that broke her heart. "He is here for you. If the world wants you dead, it will have to go through me first." She looked at his scarred, determined face. He meant it. He would die on this floor before he let that man touch her. Tears streamed down her face. She nodded. She crawled into the small, dark space. It was cold. It smelled of earth and rot and old sorrow. Eli put the water and the food beside her. "Do not make a sound," he said. "No matter what you hear, do not come out. Not until I come and get you." "Eli?" she whispered. He just looked at her, his one good eye full of a fierce, terrible love. Then he closed the heavy door, plunging her into absolute darkness. She heard the sound of the thick wooden bar sliding into place on the outside. She was buried. Eli went back to his preparations. He was a different man. The listless, grieving ghost was gone. The soldier, the vigilante, had returned. He was not just a man of force. He was a man of strategy. He did not want a gunfight. A single bullet could go through these thin walls and hit the cellar. He needed to control the fight. He took his second rifle and the box of shells and he went to the barn. He climbed the broken ladder to the hayloft, the only part of the roof that was still solid. From there, he had a clear view of the trail and a clear shot. He would not kill him from a distance, not unless he had to, but he would be ready. He lay the rifle on a beam, aimed at the trail. Then he went back to the cabin. He took his own rifle, the one he always carried. He took his skinning knife and slid it into his boot. He put 2 logs on the fire, so the chimney would smoke. He set the table for one. With 1 plate, 1 cup, he sat in his chair, his back to the wall, his rifle across his lap, and he waited. An hour passed. The sun was starting to dip, painting the snow in shades of pale purple. Then he heard it, the slow, steady clip-clop of a horse moving through the mud. Eli's body went cold. He did not move. He just breathed, slow and steady. The horse stopped outside. A man's voice, cold and clear as ice, cut through the air. "Elijah Mercer, I know you are in there. I am here on behalf of the Kansas Territorial Marshal. I am here for the woman, Lorna Harris." Eli said nothing. He heard the creak of saddle leather as the man dismounted, heavy boots on the porch. A fist pounded on the door. "Mercer, open this door or I will open it for you." Eli stood, walked to the door, and unbolted it. He stepped back, his rifle held loosely, its muzzle pointed at the floor. The door swung open. The man was as Jed had described. He was not large, not like Eli. He was of average height, whip-thin, and dressed in a clean, dark duster. He had a pale, narrow face, and eyes so light a blue they were almost white. He was clean-shaven, and his black hair was cut short. He wore his gun belt high, the holster tied down. He was a professional. He looked at Eli, his gaze taking in the scarred face, the rifle, the sheer, brutal size of the man. His lip curled, just slightly. "Elijah Mercer," he said. His voice had no accent. It was just cold. "Get off my land," Eli said, his voice a low rumble. The man smiled. It was not a real smile. It was just a baring of teeth. "My name is Silas Ridge. I have a warrant for a woman named Lorna Harris. I was told you purchased her at the settlement." "She was here," Eli said, his voice flat. He had prepared this lie. "She took the fever. The storm finished her. Died 2 weeks ago." Silas Ridge's pale eyes narrowed. He looked past Eli, into the cabin. He saw the single plate. He saw the tidy room, the swept floor. "Fever," Ridge said, his voice mocking. "How convenient. And where is the grave?" "Up on the ridge," Eli said, "near the pines." "I'll want to see it," Ridge said. He started to push his way inside. Eli did not move. He put his hand on the doorframe, blocking the way. His arm was a bar of iron. Ridge stopped. He looked at Eli's hand, then back at his face. "You are obstructing a federal marshal's agent, Mr. Mercer. That is a fine or a hanging." "You are a bounty hunter," Eli said. "You have no authority here. Get off my land, or I will put you off." Ridge's hand moved, a blur of motion, but he did not go for his gun. He held up the wanted poster. Lorna's face. Eli looked at the drawing. It was her. It was her before the bruises, before the deadness in her eyes. It was the face of a younger, softer woman. But it was her. $500. Mercer, Ridge said, his voice a seductive, cold whisper. "That is what she is worth. 300 alive, 200 dead. I will take her either way." "She is dead," Eli repeated, his voice like stone. "You are a poor liar. Mercer." Ridge's pale eyes flicked down. Eli followed his gaze. In the mud, just outside the cabin door, were 2 sets of footprints. One was Eli's massive, worn boot. The other was a smaller print, from the boots he had given her. They were fresh. They were from this morning. Eli's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on the hunt, he had forgotten the tracks. Ridge smiled. "Now, I am going to unsaddle my horse, and you are going to invite me in for dinner, and we are going to talk about where you are hiding my $500. He turned, as if Eli were no threat at all, and walked calmly to his horse. Eli stood in the doorway, his knuckles white on the rifle, his mind racing. He could shoot him now, in the back, but if he missed, Ridge would be on him, and a gunshot might make Lorna panic, might make her scream. He watched Ridge unsaddle his horse, rubbing it down with a cloth. The man was methodical, calm. He was not afraid of Eli. This was a man who hunted other men for a living. He had seen everything. Ridge finished with his horse and led it toward the barn. "You have a broken roof," Ridge called out, his voice casual. "Mind if I put him in the dry part?" Eli just watched, his mind a steel trap, calculating. This was good. The barn, that was where the second rifle was. That was where the tools were, away from the cabin, away from Lorna. "Go ahead," Eli growled. Ridge led the horse into the barn. Eli waited. A minute passed. Ridge walked out, dusting his hands. He walked back to the cabin. "Now," Ridge said, pushing past Eli, who let him pass.
Let's see what is for dinner.
Ridge stepped inside. He looked around. His eyes were sharp. They missed nothing. He saw the mended shirt on the peg. He saw the cot and the single pile of furs. Living like an animal. Mercer? Ridge said. He ran his finger along the table. But you have a woman's touch. The place is clean. Sit down, Eli said. I will stand, Ridge replied. He walked the perimeter of the room. He stopped at the locked cellar door. He saw the new, raw scratches on the wood from where Eli had slid the bar. He saw the iron key still sitting on the mantelpiece. He looked at the door. He looked at Eli. He smiled.
Fever, you said,
Ridge said, his voice soft. He tapped the cellar door with his knuckle.
She must have a powerful sickness to need a door that thick.
Get away from the door, Eli said, his voice low. Or what? Ridge mocked, echoing Lorna's words from that first night.
You will use that force you are so famous for?
He turned his back on Eli and faced the door.
Lorna Harris, I know you are in there, the marshal in Kansas. He just wants to talk. You come on out, and I will make sure no one hurts you.
He was lying. His voice was a snake's. In the cellar, Lorna heard him. Her heart stopped. She pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling her own breathing. Come now, girl, Ridge cooed.
Do not make this hard on yourself, or on your friend.
He turned to Eli. Last chance, Mercer, open the door, or I will.
I told you, Eli said. She is not here.
Fine, Ridge said with a sigh. He pulled his pistol. It was a clean, new Colt. We will do this the hard way. He was not pointing it at Eli. He was pointing it at the lock.
No!
Eli roared. He lunged. He did not go for his rifle. He did not want a shot. He lunged, his entire body a weapon, a 200-pound man of pure, desperate force. Ridge was fast. He had expected it. He turned, the gun coming up, and he fired. The explosion was deafening in the tiny cabin. The bullet tore through the fleshy part of Eli's shoulder, a white-hot poker of pain. It spun him around, but he did not stop. He was fueled by adrenaline. He crashed into Ridge, his shoulder screaming. The gun went flying, skittering into the corner. Ridge was thin, but he was wire and steel. He drove his knee into Eli's gut and his elbow into Eli's scarred face. Eli roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and he wrapped his massive arms around Ridge's body, lifting him off the floor and slamming him into the table. The table splintered, collapsing. Ridge was a dirty fighter. His thumb found Eli's good eye. Gouging. Eli bellowed, blinded, and threw him off. Ridge scrambled, crab-walking, trying to get to his gun.
Eli, his shoulder on fire, his eye weeping, saw the gun. He kicked it, sending it spinning under the cot.
Ridge was on his feet. He saw he was outmatched in strength. He ran. He bolted out the door, into the twilight. You are a dead man. Mercer, he screamed. Eli, clutching his shoulder, staggered after him. Not yet. Ridge was running for the barn, for his horse. Or, Eli realized with a jolt of cold terror, for the second rifle he had seen Eli stash in the loft. Eli ran, his boots slipping in the mud, his blood leaving a hot, dark trail. He was faster. His longer legs ate up the ground. He caught Ridge at the barn door, tackling him from behind. They crashed into the hay, a tangle of limbs and curses. It was dark in the barn. The only light came from the open door. The smell of horse and old, dry hay filled his lungs. Ridge was a snake. He wriggled free, his hand finding something on the wall, a hay hook. He swung it. The sharp point ripped through Eli's coat, glancing off his ribs, drawing more blood. Eli grunted, falling back. Ridge came at him again. The hook raised. Eli kicked out, his heavy boot connecting with Ridge's knee. There was a wet, sick crunch. Ridge screamed, a high, thin sound, and fell. The hay hook clattered on the stone floor. Eli was on him. He was on top of him, his one good hand finding Ridge's throat. His rage was a black, roaring sea. He was killing him. He was killing him for Lorna, for his wife, for everything they had taken. He saw Ridge's pale, bulging eyes. He heard the man choking, gurgling. And he saw Lorna. He saw her face. He saw her flinch. "It's the only force I know." "No." With a strangled sob, Eli loosened his grip. He did not let go, but he stopped squeezing. He stopped killing. He raised his other hand, his fist clenched, but he did not strike. He just held him, his whole body trembling with the effort of not using the force. "Get up!" Eli growled, his voice thick with pain and blood. He hauled Ridge to his feet. Ridge's leg buckled under him. Eli dragged him out of the barn, his left arm useless, his shoulder a symphony of pain. He dragged him to his horse. "Get on." Ridge, weeping in pain, his knee ruined, tried to mount. He fell. Eli, with a grunt of disgust, grabbed him by the belt and the collar and threw him bodily over the saddle. He took the man's rope and he tied his hands to the saddle horn. "Ride," Eli snarled. He slapped the horse's rump. The horse, spooked, bolted, disappearing down the dark, muddy track, its rider a moaning, flopping shape. Eli stood there, panting, the world spinning. His arm was on fire. His side was on fire. He was covered in blood, his and Ridge's. He turned, and he staggered, one step at a time, back to the cabin. He fell through the door. "Lorna!" he choked out. The cellar door exploded outward, the bar thrown to the floor. She scrambled out, her face a white mask of terror. She saw him. She saw the blood, the cabin, a ruin of broken furniture, the dark, wet pool on the floor. She saw Eli, leaning against the wall, his shirt soaked, his face pale under the scar. You are hurt," she whispered. "He is gone," Eli panted. She did not cry. She did not panic. The woman who had been a survivor, a victim, was gone. She became a healer. "Sit," she commanded, her voice sharp. "At the hearth." He obeyed. He sank onto the furs, his back against the stone, his head swimming. She tore his shirt open, her hands quick. She saw the smoking, dark hole in his shoulder. She saw the long, bloody gash along his ribs. "Water," she said. He pointed. She got it. She found the rags. She found the needle and thread she had used to mend his shirt. She found the last of the whiskey he had been saving, and she poured it, not into a cup, but onto the rags. She cleaned his wounds. He did not flinch. He just watched her face. She threaded the needle, her hands shaking, but only a little. "This will hurt," she said. "I know," he whispered. She began to stitch his shoulder, the needle pulling the skin tight. It was a crude, ugly job. He hissed, his body rigid, but he did not pull away. She finished the shoulder and moved to his side. She was covered in his blood. She finished, her whole body trembling. She sat back on her heels, her face pale, exhausted. Eli looked at her. He looked at the blood on her hands, on her dress. He looked at the ruined cabin. "You are a fool, Eli Mercer," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "You are a fool. You could have died." He looked at her, at this small, fierce woman who had just sewn him back together. He tried to smile, but his scarred mouth would not let him. "Maybe," he whispered, his voice cracking, "but I am your fool." She looked at him, and her face crumpled. She did not weep. She just broke. She leaned forward, and she put her head on his good shoulder, her hands flat against his chest. He raised his good arm, and he held her. They stayed like that for a long time. Later, when he had rested, he saw something on the floor, near the cot. The wanted poster. Ridge had dropped it. He reached for it, but he grunted in pain. Lena got it. She looked at her own face, at the girl she had been.
$500,
she whispered. Eli just watched her. She walked to the fireplace. She held the poster, looking at it, then, deliberately, she fed it to the flames. They watched it curl, the drawing of her face blackening, turning to gray ash. They sat in the ruined cabin, in the smell of blood and smoke. The danger was gone, for now.
Eli,
she said, her voice quiet, staring into the fire. Yes. When spring comes, proper, what will you do? He looked at her. He knew what she was asking. Was this just survival? Was this just a truce until the weather changed? I am going to rebuild that fence, he said, his voice slow. I am going to buy some seed. I am going to plant corn on the south field. He reached out with his good hand, and he found hers. And I am going to build a new chair to replace the one I broke. She turned. She looked at him. He was talking about a future. He was talking about crops. He was talking about them. She squeezed his hand, and for the first time, in that valley, in that cabin, they were not just surviving. They were beginning to live. Spring came, not as a gentle promise, but as a muddy, violent brawl. The great drifts of snow collapsed, and the valley, which had been a quiet bowl of white, became a roaring, churning place. The creeks, swollen with meltwater, tore new paths through the prairie. The ground, frozen for months, thawed into a deep, clinging mud that pulled at a man's boots. Eli's shoulder healed badly. The bullet from Ridge's gun had torn the muscle, and Lorna's stitching, while it had saved his life, was crude. He would never again have the full, easy strength of that arm. His side was a puckered, angry scar, but he was alive.
He was alive, and he was no longer a ghost.
In the first weeks of the thaw, he was weak. It was Lorna who did the hard work. She was the one who climbed to the barn's broken loft, throwing down the last of the good hay. She was the one who hauled the water and milked the single, hardy goat. He would sit by the fire, his arm in a sling she had made from a flour sack, and he would watch her. He watched her fill the small cabin. She was no longer a shadow, a flinching, silent creature. Her hair, washed and tied back, was thick and glossy. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out. She moved with purpose. She was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of presence. When he was strong enough to walk, he started with the fence line, digging new post holes in the soft earth, his one good arm straining. Lorna worked beside him, hauling the heavy posts, her small hands raw and blistered. But she did not complain. They were not mending his ranch. They were building theirs. One morning, he hitched the big gelding to the wagon. "We need seed," he said. Lorna paused, her hands in the bucket of goat feed. "To the settlement?" "We need seed," he repeated. "And flour and coffee." She looked down at her dress, the one she had arrived in, now washed and mended a dozen times. It was the only one she had. They will stare." "Let them," Eli said. The ride down was slow, the wagon wheels sinking deep in the mud. Lorna sat on the bench beside him, her back straight. When they rumbled into the small, muddy street, every head turned. Sledge, the auctioneer, was standing on his porch. He saw them. He saw Eli, his scarred face set like granite, and he saw Lorna, sitting beside him, not behind him, not walking. She was wearing Eli's old wool shawl, the one she had lent him in the barn, and she looked like she belonged there. Sledge's mouth dropped open, and he hurried back inside his store, as if he had seen a phantom. Jedediah Stone came out of the blacksmith shop, wiping soot from his hands. He nodded, a slow, respectful gesture. "Mercer, ma'am." Lorna nodded back. It was the first time anyone had called her ma'am in her life. Eli pulled up at the trading post. "I will be inside," he said. "Wait here." "No," Lorna said, her voice quiet but firm. "I need thread. And soap?" He looked at her, surprised. She was not asking. She was telling. He gave a short, single nod. They walked in together. The store was silent. The few men inside, trappers and ranchers, stopped their conversations. They looked at Eli, then at Lorna, then at Eli's arm, still held stiffly at his side. They knew what a bullet wound looked like. Eli walked to the counter. Sledge was there, looking pale. "Need seed," Eli said. "Corn and bean, and 50 pounds of flour, coffee, salt." "Of course, Mr. Mercer," Sledge said, his voice slick and nervous. "Right away." While Sledge hurried to fill the order, Lorna walked through the small store. She picked up a spool of black thread, a block of lye soap. She saw a stack of old newspapers brought in by the last supply wagon, their edges yellowed. She picked them up. 2. She had not read words on a page in 2 years. She brought her things to the counter. Sledge looked at them, then at Eli. Eli nodded, and Sledge added them to the bill. As they were loading the wagon, Jedediah Stone ambled over, his face grim. "Mercer," he said, his voice low, pitched so Lorna, who was arranging the sacks, could not hear. Eli stopped, a bag of seed in his good hand. "Jed." "Got word. From a trapper came down from the Wind River Range." Jed would not meet his eye. "That bounty hunter, Ridge." Eli's body went still. "He made it to a camp, but he died. Not from the cold, from the infection. His leg." Eli just nodded, his face unreadable. "That is not the bad part. Eli," Jed said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He had a brother, Amos Ridge, runs an outfit of hard men, ex-soldiers, vigilantes, the kind you used to know. The trapper said Amos found his brother, found the horse, and he swore an oath. He is coming here, not for a bounty, for vengeance, and he is not coming alone." Eli stared at the blacksmith, the new, fragile piece of the spring, the smell of the corn seed, the sound of Lorna humming in the wagon. It all evaporated. "When?" Eli asked, his voice flat. "Soon as the high passes are clear." Jed said, "Maybe a week, maybe 2. They say it is a whole outfit. Eli, 6, maybe 7 men." "I thank you, Jed," Eli said. He slung the last bag into the wagon, his bad shoulder screaming in protest. "Eli," Jed said, grabbing his arm, "get her out of there. You cannot win this. Not alone. Take her. Ride south. Do not come back." Eli looked at the blacksmith, his one good eye cold as winter. "This is my land." He climbed onto the wagon. Lorna looked at him. His face had changed. The quiet peace was gone, replaced by the stone mask she had seen the night Ridge came. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just the mud." The ride back was silent. The sun was warm. The new seed was in the wagon, but the cold had returned. That night, she sat by the fire, her lips moving silently, reading the old newspapers. She read him a story about a train in Ohio, about a new law in Washington. Her voice was soft, and for an hour, the dread receded. He sat at the table, his rifle broken down, cleaning it, oiling every part. His movements were steady, methodical. She stopped reading. "Who is coming? Eli?" He did not look up. "What do you mean?" "You have not cleaned that rifle in a week. You are checking the action on the buffalo gun. Your shoulder hurts, but you are lifting the ammunition box. Who is coming?" He stopped. He looked at her, this small woman who had learned to read him as well as she now read the news. He could not lie to her. Not anymore. "Ridge,"
The one who came here. He had a brother.
Lorna put the newspaper down. She did not panic. She did not cry. Her face went very, very pale, but her hands were steady. When?
Soon, a week. Jedediah said he is not alone. How many?
6 or 7. She sat in the silence, her mind working. She was not the woman who had run to the burned-out cabin. That woman was gone.
You have 2 rifles?
She said, her voice flat.
You have 1 good arm. We have 50 rounds. Maybe—
Lorna, he started.
She stood up. She walked over to the table and picked up the heavy buffalo gun.
It was almost as tall as she was.
Show me.
What? Show me how to use it. I will not hide in the cellar this time. No, he said, his voice hard. You will do as I say. You will hide.
No, she said, and her voice was as hard as his. I am not your property. Eli, I am not a sack of flour you hide in the ground. I am your fool. Remember, that means I stay. That means I fight.
He looked at her, a fierce, terrible pride rising in his chest. It was a pride that terrified him, because it meant he had something new to lose. You have never killed a man, he said, his voice soft.
You do not know that, she whispered. The man in Kansas, I stabbed him, yes, but I shot the man who came after me. I missed, but I shot at him.
This is different. This is not panic. This is aiming. This is seeing a man's face and stopping him.
Then teach me, she said.
The next day, he took her up the ridge. He set a rusted can on a log. He showed her how to hold the heavy rifle, how to brace it against her shoulder. He showed her how to breathe, how to exhale, how to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. She fired. The recoil was brutal. It knocked her back a step, and her shoulder was instantly bruised. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet to the left. Again, he said. She fired, again and again. She fired until her shoulder was a mass of purple and black, until her ears were ringing. She fired until her hands were steady. She fired until the can jumped. They spent a week. They mended the fence. They planted the seed. And every evening, they trained. She learned to load. She learned to clear a jam. She learned to see. Do not aim for the head, he told her, his voice the grim, flat tone of a soldier. Aim for the chest. It is bigger. You just want to make them stop. One night, they sat by the fire, the cabin secure, the rifles clean. The waiting was the worst part. Lorna looked at the cellar door. The heavy bar was leaning against the wall, a silent reminder.
Eli, she said, when you fought him? Ridge, I heard him. He was at the door. He knew I was in there.
Yes, but you locked it? How did you know he would not get in? It was not just a root cellar, Eli said. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the locked door, his face full of the old, familiar grief. I told you my wife Sarah, she hid there. When the raiders came—
Yes,
Lorna whispered.
After I buried her, I could not leave it open. I could not throw her things away, but I could not look at them.
He stood up, his body stiff. He walked to the mantelpiece and took down the heavy iron key. He looked at it, then at Lorna. I have not been in there since that day, he said, his voice thick.
I locked it, and I
left her there. Her clothes. Her book. Lorna stood. She walked to him and gently took the key from his hand.
She is not in there. Eli,
she whispered. She walked to the cellar door. She put the key in the lock. It was still stiff. She turned it. She pulled the bar away and opened the door. The cold, earthy smell wafted out. She took the lantern from the table and she went down. Eli stood at the top, his hand on the door frame, his body trembling. He could not follow. Lorna descended the stone steps. It was as she remembered, cold, dark, and full of sorrow. The food Eli had given her was still there, but in the corner was the wooden chest he had spoken of. Her hands shook. She felt like a trespasser. She opened it. Inside were a woman's things, a simple calico dress, neatly folded, a pair of small, worn shoes, a child's rattle, carved from wood, and a small, leather-bound journal. She sat on the cold steps, the lantern light flickering, and she opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. It was not a journal of feelings. It was a frontier woman's ledger. April 10th, 1867. The snow is late this year. Eli worries for the calves. I pray he is safe on the mountain. April 12th. Saw the first robin. I told Eli. He just grunted, but I saw him smile later, when he thought I was not looking. May 1st. Planted the corn. Eli built a new chair. It is sturdy. He is a good man, though the war left a shadow on him. Lorna read on. She read about the new calf, about the drought, about the fear of raiders, and the last entry, written in a hurried, shaky hand. August 4th. I see smoke. On the ridge. Eli is in town. I am going to the cellar. The entry stopped. Lorna closed the book. She was weeping. The silent tears she had once shed for herself, she now shed for this other woman, this woman named Sarah, who had loved this same scarred, quiet man, who had sat in this same small cabin, hoping for corn to grow, hoping for a child. She finally understood. She understood the depth of his grief. It was not just loss, it was guilt. He had not been here to save her. He had locked this door not to keep the world out, but to keep his failure, his grief, locked in. She came up the stairs, the journal in her hand. Eli was standing where she had left him, his face a pale, agonized mask. She did not say anything. She just handed him the book. He took it. His hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He stared at it, at his wife's handwriting, and a sound broke from his throat, a dry, tearing sob he had held in for 6 years. Lorna put her arms around him, her small frame pressed against his shaking one. "It is all right, Eli," she whispered. "You can let her go. She is not in there. I am here." He clung to her, his face buried in her hair, and he wept. Later, when the grief had passed, he stood at the open fire. He held the journal. What do I do with it?" he whispered. "You burn it," Lorna said, her voice gentle. "You let her go." He looked at her, his eye clear. He nodded. He placed the book in the fire. They watched the pages curl and blacken, the words turning to ash. They stood at the fireplace, the last ghost gone. "Eli," she said. "Yes." "That man, Sledge, he sold me to you. But you used a badge. Was it a real contract?" "No," he said. "It was just a trade. Sledge knew the badge. It belonged to a man who owed me. He knew I would not be trifled with. But it was not a legal paper, not a marriage." "Good," she said. He looked at her, confused. "Good." "I will not be sold," she said. "And I will not be your wife. Not like that. Not with a paper from a man like Sledge, or a preacher who does not know us." "Then what?" he asked, his heart sinking. She stepped closer to him. She took his large, scarred hand and his one good hand, and she held them. "I will be your partner," she said, "not as ownership, but as equal protection. I will promise, but not with a white dress, not with a priest. Just a promise. Me to you, you to me, that we will stand together." He looked down at their joined hands. He saw his scars, and her scars. He saw the strength in her. "A promise," he said, his voice thick. "A promise," she repeated. The day came. It was a hot, still morning. The air was heavy. Eli had been on the ridge since dawn, watching. He came back to the cabin, his movements quick. "They are here," he said.
7 of them, coming up the valley slow. Lorna's face went pale, but she nodded. She picked up the buffalo gun. She checked the load. "The cellar?" she asked. "No," he said. "The barn. The loft. You can see the cabin and the trail. They will come for the cabin. You will be behind them. Remember what I taught you. Aim for the chest, and do not fire until I do." "Eli, no, I will stay with you." "You will do as I say," he commanded, his voice pure iron. "This is not a discussion. This is strategy. I need you watching my back. Go now." She ran, her small figure bent low, the heavy rifle in her hands. He watched her make it to the barn, watched her disappear inside. He went into the cabin. He barred the door. He took his own rifle and went to the window. He waited. He heard the horses, the jingle of harness, the low, male laughter. They were arrogant. They were not expecting a fight. A voice, cold and loud, shattered the silence. "Mercer, I am Amos Ridge. You killed my brother. You send out the girl and we will let you live." Eli said nothing. He just raised his rifle. "Have it your way," Amos yelled. "Burn it!" A torch, already prepared, sailed through the air. It landed on the dry, warped shingles of the roof. The wood, baked by years of sun, caught instantly. Fire! They were burning it. A bullet smashed through the window, sending glass spraying. Eli fired back. A single, measured shot. A man screamed and fell from his horse. One. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the thin wooden walls. The cabin was a death trap. In the barn, Lorna saw the fire. She saw the men surrounding the cabin. She saw a man, laughing, trying to kick in the back door. She raised the buffalo gun. Her hands were shaking. She put the stock to her bruised shoulder. She remembered Eli's voice. "Breathe. Squeeze. Stop him." She aimed. She saw his chest. She squeezed. The rifle exploded. The sound a deafening boom. The man at the door collapsed. A hole in his back. She had done it. The men outside scattered, confused, looking for the second shooter. Eli used the confusion. He burst from the burning door, his rifle up. He shot one man, two. Smoke was pouring from the cabin. The heat was intense. A man on a horse rounded the corner. He saw Lorna in the loft. He raised his pistol. Eli saw him. "Lorna, down!" He fired, but he was high. The man fired at the loft. A bullet struck Eli. Not in the leg, in the chest. He was thrown back against the burning wall, his rifle clattering to the ground. "Eli!" Lorna screamed. Amos Ridge, his face a mask of rage, dismounted. He saw Eli on the ground, struggling to move, the blood spreading on his chest. "Now, you dog!" Amos snarled, walking toward him, his pistol raised. Eli tried to reach his rifle. It was too far. Amos aimed his pistol at Eli's head. "A shot? Not from the loft?" Amos stopped. He looked down. A small, dark hole had appeared in his own chest. He looked at Eli, confused. Eli was holding a small, boot-hidden pistol. His hand was shaking. Amos Ridge fell, dead. The last of the gang, seeing their leader fall, seeing the barn, seeing the burning house, turned and fled, riding hard. It was over. Silence, broken by the roar of the fire. Lorna scrambled down from the loft, dropping the heavy rifle, and she ran. She ran to him, through the mud and the smoke. "Eli! Oh, God! Eli!" He was on the ground, his back against the burning logs, his eyes half closed. The blood it was too much. You hit him?" Eli whispered, a bloody foam on his lips. I, she sobbed, tearing at his shirt, her hands covered in his blood. "The cellar," he coughed. "Get in the cellar. The house. It is going—" The roof was groaning. "No, I will not leave you," she screamed. She grabbed him, her small body straining.
his one good arm draped over her shoulder. She dragged him. She dragged him. Step by step, away from the inferno, as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. She dragged him to the barn, and he collapsed onto the hay, his breathing shallow. She tore open his shirt. The bullet was high, in the chest. It was bad.
"You are a fool,"
she wept, pressing her hands to the wound. "I know," he whispered, his eyes closing.
"But I am your fool."
She looked at him, dying. She looked at their home, a raging pillar of fire. They had won, but the house was burned to the ground. He did not die. He lay in the half-ruined barn for 10 days, hovering in a gray, fevered twilight between life and death. The bullet had missed his heart, but it had torn through his lung. He breathed in shallow, wet rasps, and his dreams were full of smoke and gunfire. Lorna did not leave his side. She lived in the barn, sleeping on the hay beside him, her hand on his chest to feel his breathing. She was no longer a healer. She was a guardian. She used the last of the whiskey to clean the wound, her face grim and set. She tore her own dress into bandages. She milked the goat and forced the thin, warm milk between his cracked lips. She sat through the long nights, the buffalo gun across her lap, watching the shadows, listening for the sound of returning riders. But none came. The cabin burned for 2 days. It collapsed into a smoking, black square of charcoal and ash. The smell of it, the scent of their lost home, hung in the valley for a week. On the 11th day, Eli's fever broke. He woke, his one good eye clear, and saw her. She was asleep, sitting up, her head resting on the edge of his makeshift bed, the heavy rifle leaning against her shoulder. Her face was gaunt, smudged with soot and dirt, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He was a man of force, but this small, quiet woman had a strength that dwarfed his. She had pulled him back from the grave with nothing but her own sheer, stubborn will. He raised his good hand, his fingers trembling, and he touched her hair. She woke instantly, her hand flying to the rifle, her eyes wide and fierce. Then she saw him. She saw his eye, clear and aware.
"Eli,"
she breathed. It was not a word. It was a prayer. "Water," he rasped. "They rebuilt, not at first. First they healed, and first they buried the past." When Eli could stand, leaning heavily on a stick Lorna had cut for him, they walked out onto the blood-soaked earth. The bodies of Amos Ridge and his men were still where they had fallen. This is not a place for a home," Eli said, his voice a low rumble. He took a shovel, and with his one good arm, he began to dig. Lorna helped, carrying the stones to mark the graves. They did not bury them with prayers. They buried them with grim, silent finality, on the far side of the valley, where the creek washed the land clean. When it was done, Eli stood for a moment, looking at the black charred square that had been his home for so long. He walked into the ashes. They were cold now. He knelt, his bad leg protesting, and he dug with his hands. He dug into the spot where the root cellar had been, the place of his long-held grief. The fire had been so hot, the contents were just ash and melted glass. But he found what he was looking for, a small, melted lump of gold, his wife's wedding ring. He stood, the hot metal cooling in his palm. He looked at it, the last physical piece of his old life. He had held on to the grief for so long. It had become a part of him, like his scars. He had locked it in the cellar, and in doing so, he had locked himself in with it. Lorna had not gone down with him. She had given him that moment. Now, she stood, watching him. He looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair a wild tangle, her dress a collection of rags. And he knew he could not build a new life while holding onto the ashes of the old. He drew his arm back, his good arm, and with all his strength, he threw the lump of gold. It sailed in a high, glittering arc, landing in the deepest part of the creek, and was gone. He let out a long, shuddering breath, as if a great weight had been lifted from his lungs. Lorna came to him. Stepping through the ashes, she carried a single, charred piece of paper. It was the last page of the ledger Sledge had given Eli, the one that listed her as a bride contract. She had found it in the mud, blown clear of the fire. She looked at it. It was the last piece of her old life, the last brand of ownership. She did not throw it. She did not bury it. She held it out, and Eli struck a match. They watched it burn, the words curling into nothing, the smoke rising into the clean, spring sky. They did not rebuild on the same spot. The earth was poisoned with blood and bad memories.
Higher up,
Eli said, pointing with his chin.
On the ridge, where the pines are thick, where we can see the whole valley. It was slow work. He was still weak, and she was small. But they worked hand in hand. They used the horses to drag the unburned logs from the barn. Eli, his shoulder aching, taught her how to use the axe, how to notch the logs. She was a quick study. Her hands, once soft, were now hard, calloused, and capable. He felled the trees. She stripped the bark. He set the foundation stones. She mixed the mud and straw for the chinking. He was the force. She was the direction. They built a new cabin. It was not large. It had one room, like the old one, and a solid stone fireplace. But it was not a grave. The window was large, facing south, and the sun flooded it. It was tight and warm, and it was theirs. They built a new sturdy door, and this time there was no lock. Summer came. The corn they had planted in the old field, the one below the ruins, grew tall and green. The valley was breathing again. Eli's shoulder healed. The constant, deep ache of it faded, and he found he no longer needed the stick to walk. He moved without a limp. The bullet had taken something from him, but Lorna's care had given him more back. And Lorna, she changed. The woman who had flinched at every sound, who had lived in a constant, silent brace, was gone. One afternoon, a heavy branch cracked in the forest and fell with a sound like a rifle shot. Eli turned, his hand reaching for a gun that was not there. Lorna, who was kneading dough on the new table, did not even look up. She just continued her work, her movements rhythmic and calm. She was no longer a hunted thing. This was her land. She had fought for it. She had bled for it. She was safe. They slept in the new bed Eli had built, a wide, sturdy frame of pine. They no longer slept as two separate, wounded people sharing warmth. They slept with their hands entwined, their bodies settled together, a silent, nightly promise that they were not alone. One day, in the late summer, a rider came through. It was not a bounty hunter. It was a preacher, an old man with a white beard and kind eyes, making his circuit. He stopped, surprised to see the new cabin high on the ridge. Eli and Lorna met him on the porch. They gave him water and the last of their bread. The preacher, seeing them, seeing the quiet, fierce way they stood together, cleared his throat. God has blessed this valley. I do not mean to pry, but are you two married in the eyes of the Lord? Eli looked at Lorna. He saw her face tighten, just a little, at the old words. Marriage, ownership, contract. Lorna spoke first. No, preacher, we are not. But we would like you to witness something, Eli said, his voice a low rumble. The preacher was confused. Witness what? A wedding?
No, Lorna said. She took Eli's hand. A promise. They stood outside, under the vast, open Wyoming sky, with the wind in the pines as their only music. The preacher stood by, his hat in his hands, a witness to something he did not fully understand, but which he could feel was as holy as any church. Eli turned to her. He took her small, scarred hands in his large, scarred ones. He looked at her, his one good eye holding all the tenderness he had learned from her. You are not mine, he said, his voice thick. You do not belong to me. You belong to yourself.
but I will never let go." Lorna's eyes filled with tears, but she did not weep. She smiled. "You were never cruel, Eli," she said, her voice clear and strong. You just forgot how to be kind. I remembered for you." They did not kiss, they just stood there, holding hands, their promise made. The preacher, his own eyes wet, just nodded and rode on. Fall came, and the corn was high. They needed supplies for the winter. This time, they rode down to the settlement together, side by side on the wagon bench. As they pulled into the street, the town went silent, just as it had before. But this time, people did not stare with fear or pity. They did not see the disfigured ghost and his purchased bride. They saw Eli Mercer, tall and straight, his scarred face calm, and they saw Lorna Mercer, sitting beside him, her head high, meeting their gaze. They saw two people who had faced down 7 men. They saw 2 survivors. They saw a force to be reckoned with. Jedediah Stone waved from his forge, sledge, at the trading post, called Eli Sir. They were not outcasts. They were legends. That night, they sat in their new cabin. The fire was warm. The new chairs were sturdy. Lorna was reading to him, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet. Eli was watching her, his face soft in the firelight. She stopped reading. She looked at him, at the old, puckered scar on his face, the one that pulled his mouth into a grimace. She reached out and touched it, her fingers gentle. "You are still hurting, aren't you?" she whispered. Eli closed his one good eye. Leaning into her touch, he thought of the war, of the whip, of the years of cold and loneliness. He thought of the fire, and the bullet, and the ghosts. He opened his eye and looked at her. "Less," he replied, his voice a rough whisper. "Less, every time you look at me like that." Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.